Okay, good morning, everyone, and Chodesh Tov. And before I start, I just want to apologize. We didn't think through our timings that successfully in terms of Rosh Chodesh. In hindsight, I know a lot of people have been waiting online and also live. A lot of people have to dash now, so I do apologize. We were looking at the life and thoughts of Rabbi HaLevi. We discussed many of his ideas and thoughts and incredible writings, but we've now found ourselves sort of quite deeply into the Kuzari. Again, I'm determined that this series will not become a Kuzari shir, but merely a look at some of the main themes in the life and times of the Kuzari and his thoughts. But we do have to spend some time thinking about the Kuzari as a sefer, since that's his most dominant and significant work. We saw last week how the supposed mouthpiece for the Kuzari, the Chacham who is there speaking to the king of the Chazars, opens his conversation, his opening presentation. And actually, Rabbi HaLevi structures it's important to remember when we look at his conversations that he's choosing how to present arguments. This is not a historical record. This is a device for him to present how he thinks best to conduct this debate. And we saw that the motive of the king seems to be built on the seemingly flimsy foundation of his dream. And we discussed what Rabbi HaLevi is doing with that, why he thinks this is a firm foundation to embark on a quest for truth, to have a dream in which a malach, an angel, appears to one and says, Kavanoscha Utsuya. We saw his relatively swift dismissal of the philosopher, the Muslim, and the Christian. And again, listen to the previous week's Shurim to see that. And now the Jewish sage, the Jewish scholar, steps forward to give his presentation. And it's almost as if Rabbi HaLevi sets out to give the Chacham an argument that is going to frustrate and annoy the king. And the Chacham is going to say certain words, and the king is going to respond basically, I knew you Jews were stupid, and I knew it wasn't worth, anyway was questioning whether it was worth ever including in this conversation. What's a poor response you've just given me? And again, we have to remember that Rabbi HaLevi is doing this as a literary device, as a point he wants to make. And the Chacham, again, we're here really, and my main interest in a sense in this is not to give a whole Kuzari share, but simply to look at the opening chapter of the Kuzari. To me, that's in some ways the most interesting chapter, because it's there that the Rabbi HaLevi lays out the almost foundation of his belief, as we saw in his dismissal of philosophy, and as we saw in his view that everyone has a malach, an angel speaking to them, saying you have to seek ways to make your actions meaningful. And here again, I think you see something very interesting. I think you see, in a sense, the vision that Rabbi HaLevi has in everything else he wants to say. And the Jewish Chacham steps forward, and he says to the king says to him, tell me, what do you believe in? Tell me about Judaism. And he says, I believe in the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I believe in the God who built a personal relationship with the Jewish people, who took us out of Egypt, and who gave us the Torah. To which the king replies and says, what a narrow parochial vision. Where is the sweeping grandeur of spiritual ideals? When I spoke to the philosopher, at least I got a sort of a vision of life. When I spoke to the Christian and the Muslim, they told me about God, the creator of heavens and earth, a God that I can relate to as a non-Jew, and a God who is universal, and a God who achieved existence. And yet, when I speak to you, all you're telling me is this narrow, parochial family experience. This is the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, three Bedouins who wandered around Eretz Yisrael, the God of a little tribe that found itself in a desert in the Middle East. This is this narrow, nationalistic, family-centered, parochial vision of life that you're giving me. And he says, he responds and says, I had actually thought about not even inviting you to this debate because of I know how narrow-minded you people are, and I know how your Golos, your exile, has left you reduced with nothing positive to you. Why is this the response that you're giving me? So again, it's almost as if Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi is setting up the Jewish representative to deliberately wind up the king. Here you have this king who's embarking on a really exciting project. He's trying to make a decision about life and values and everything else. And the philosopher, the Christian and the Muslim give him some sort of big picture, meaningful message. Then they drill down to the details, and the king doesn't like the details. Fine. Why is this the way the Jew starts? Is this what you need to start with? If someone said to us, tell me about the vision of Judaism for the world, like, I'm thinking about my life and how to find meaning and direction. Why start off with, this is the God who formed a covenant with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and had a relationship with them, and then appeared to the Jewish people. The Kuzari here is almost deliberately playing with a central idea of, is Judaism actually a universalistic religion, or is it particularist? Is it just a tribal faith, just the faith of our people? Does it have something to say to the whole of humanity, to the whole of the world? Or maybe no, if you're Jewish, then this is your religion, and if you're not, then it's not. And he's starting off with this sort of tribal response. And again, in this, like I've argued in all the other starting points of this first chapter of the Kuzari, really, Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi is again laying out his whole agenda. He's laying out everything that he wants to achieve. And his response is going to be on a dual level. Yes, that is Judaism. That is Judaism. Of course, Judaism has a universal message, but the foundation, the start, has to start off from the particular. We start off from the particular, and then out of that, this particular little group of people have things that they want to say to the world. But you have to start off with that little group of people. And there's three reasons, really, why the Kuzari thinks this is essential. The first reason is because he thinks, again, remember, the Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi is here as an opponent of broad, sweeping philosophy. There's neo-Aristotelian Platonism, which is enthralling and fascinating the Jewish world. In his own way, he's also writing a Moreh Nevuchim. He's writing a guide to the perplexed, this Jew who's struggling to think about his Judaism and the Greek worldview. And we've set him up almost in an imaginary conversation with the Rambam, who's 100 years later, and himself. He's going to debate this big view. So when the Rambam, and in a proto version, the Rambam's philosophical predecessors, perhaps Rav Saadiah Gaon, grapple with this Jew who's hearing these beautiful, sweeping, universal messages of Greek philosophy. And the Rambam is going to answer and say, yes, Judaism has all that depth and more to it. The Kuzari is giving a different sort of answer to it. He's saying again, we saw this previously when he just dismisses philosophy like that, where the king has this dream. The basic response of the king to the philosophical areas is non-engagement. That's not what the angel said to me. In other words, I have inside me the spiritual voice that tells me that you need actions in order to be a good person. So here again, the Kuzari is saying, I'm not going to duck, I'm not going to shirk, I'm not going to pretend and try and engage philosophy on its own terms. No, Judaism is about relationships. It's immersive. It's about personal connection with Hashem. It's about our personal communication with him. It's about homes and individuals and peoples and nations and how we personally connect and immerse ourselves in these sorts of spiritual experiences. And therefore, the answer I'm giving you is not going to be a big universal message. It's going to be about our personal confrontation with the divine and the personal conversations and interactions that we had with him and still can have with him, and in the future will have with him. You want to join the conversation? We'll talk about that later. You can join the Jewish people. You want to have some universal messages about life and everything else? Yes, that's also fine. We can talk about that. But if you really hear inside you that voice that says that your kavanot, your intentions are admirable, but your actions are not admirable, you need to start thinking about mitzvahs. You need to think about a covenantal relationship with Hashem. You need to think about commitment. You need to think about the commandment. And therefore, I'm not going to shirk or sell out Yiddishkeit and sort of buy into your big sweeping worldview, because otherwise this conversation can never go anywhere. If I'm going to play to your game, O king of the Chazars, and I'm going to try and give sweeping visions, we may come out with an interesting truth that Judaism has sweeping philosophical visions. I'm not disagreeing even with many of these ideas, we're always then going to be missing the point. You're not really going to be hearing the authentic truth that we have to say. Again, I remind you, Rabbi HaLevi is not anti-philosophical. He studied philosophy in his youth. He recognizes the role of philosophy in science and other areas. He speaks about that later. But he says if you're looking at ma'asim, if you're looking at deeds, if you're looking at really at Judaism from the inside, that really forming a connection, it starts off with immersive, relationshipal connections. So that's the first reason, I think, why he starts off in this particularistic manner. And he goes on and explains this later. This is really the continuation of the book. The second reason he does so is because he believes, and here we come to another whole topic within the Kuzari, he believes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu aligned his spiritual message with a particular people, and it was translated through the Jewish national experience. And we, as Jewish people, were uniquely equipped, were molded by God into being uniquely equipped to receive that spiritual message. In other words, it is a national, particularist Jewish message. Torah was given in our language in Lashon HaKodesh to Jewish prophets who lived and thought as Jews, and who were equipped uniquely to hear that spiritual message. Now, I'm not going to delve into this, at least this week, but the Kuzari later is going to really spell this out, and he's going to argue that there is something about Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language, Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, and the Jewish people as the holy people, which allows them to be the vehicles of the Jewish message. And if you want to receive that message and to become part of it, you can't just accept the ideas of Judaism, but you have to actually join the Jewish people. So again, I want to emphasize this point. When we think about, for example, Geirus, conversion, we sort of don't question this. We often don't think about this, but we need to think about this. Why isn't Geirus, conversion, just acceptance of a belief system? Why does it involve joining a particular sort of ethno-national group? And the Kuzari's answer to that question is because it's essential. The ability of the Jewish people to have that relationship with Hashem is because there's a national family tribal covenant that we have with Hashem. We are in a relationship with Hashem, and that relationship allows us to receive and deliver on the messages that we want to do. And without that, without being part of that, without being part of the Jewish national story, you can't be part of the Torah vision of life. So the second reason why the Kuzari emphasizes this particularistic element of this is, again, not because he doesn't think it has universal things to say to all humanity, and we don't dream and long of all humanity connecting with Hashem, and he speaks about that later, but because this is a uniquely Jewish story. When we were chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we were created as the vehicle of a spiritual message, and the language we speak, Lashon HaKodesh, the country we live in, Eretz Yisrael, and the people we are, Am Yisrael, that allows us to be the vehicle of that spiritual message. I remind you about some of the themes that we spoke about in previous weeks when we looked at the Kuzari, his love of Lashon HaKodesh, his love of Eretz Yisrael, with great difficulty and Mesiras Nefesh in a very, very tough world. He makes a decision to make Aliyah. That doesn't just mean jumping onto an aeroplane and getting there 5 hours later. It's a tremendous sacrifice. We don't even know 100% if he made it, and if he did, he died shortly afterwards, or maybe, as per the legends, even at the point he enters Eretz Yisrael. So his famous Sion songs of love for Eretz Yisrael. So he believes that to be in the fullest relationship with Hashem, you need to be a people with a language living in Eretz Yisrael. That's what it means to be fully connected to Hashem. And yeah, that's narrow and particularistic. And I'm going to say that straight out to you, King. I'm not going to have the conversation on your terms of reference. I'm going to have them on my terms of reference. So that's the second reason why the Kuzari gives us as a uniquely Jewish answer. The third reason he does so is because he thinks this is what gives authenticity to our message. Because if we ask ourselves, how do we know that any of this is true? How do we know about Matan Torah? How do we know about the revelation, about commandments and everything else? The answer is, again, a particularistic answer, a personal answer. And the answer is because we, as a nation, personally experienced it. This is our family history. This is what we went through. And therefore, we have confidence in the belief of Yiddishkeit and so on. And again, we're going to unpick all those arguments. So to summarize again, in this first few, really, we're so shallowy into the Kuzari. We really have only learned a few paragraphs of the Kuzari. There's 5 volumes or essays to go. in the Kuzari. But in these first few paragraphs, I think he says so much of what he wants to say. He dismisses the philosopher because it's nice philosophical speculation, but doesn't speak to the human spirit. Dismisses the Christian and the Muslim, and now the annoying Jew comes along who irritates the king of the Khazars. And the Kuzari, again, this isn't a real conversation. This is a structured conversation. So when the Rabbi HaLevi knows what the king is going to respond to the Chacham, and the Chacham gives his reply, and the Chacham gives his reply, the king says, this is so irritating and narrow-minded, and I knew I was right when I was really weighing up whether even to bother inviting the Jews, because you people are so clannish and tribal and narrowly centered. I don't see any great sweeping vision. And the Kuzari's, the Chacham's going to say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm going to defend that. There is a sweeping vision, but you have to start off with the particular, with personal, national experiences. Why? Because Yiddishkeit is about relationship. It's about immersive things. It's not about sweeping philosophical ideas, though it has them, but that's not ultimately what it's about. Because the vehicle of that revelation, of that relationship, is us as a people and a nation, and because that's what lends it, it's our personal national experiences that lends it the authority and the trust and the reliability that it deserves. So that's really the sort of opening move of the Kuzari. And I really just want to spend a little bit of time now unpicking in the next couple of shiurim those points, and then with that we'll really conclude. We're not going to do a whole analysis of the Kuzari, but I just really want to unpick these opening points and see where this takes us. Thoughts, questions? Okay, so what I'd like to discuss now is the next sort of stage of the Kuzari's argument, in which he's going to claim that reliability of message is because of our personal national experiences, and this is the conversation just from a technical level in the next stages of the Kuzari. If you look at it inside, gets to the king really saying to the Chacham, how do I know any of this? I mean, if there's a conversation back and forth, but I'll try and sort of summarize it out of order, just to draw out the themes. If a stranger arrives from a distant land, or I hear reports from a distant land about a magnificent emperor in faraway India, in the time of the Khazars, an empire sort of out of direct contact, how can I believe anything they're telling me? How can I know anything they say about this incredible, supposedly rich empire there? How do I know there's any truth to it? And a sort of conversation about how we work out truth in life and what's considered reliable evidence. Now, this has in recent years been cited as the Kuzari principle, and it's really one argument for belief in God, in Torah, in Sinai. It's not really just the Kuzari who puts forward this argument. Rav Saadiah Gaon puts it forward first. In this series, we've never looked at Rav Saadiah Gaon. Maybe he could be a future Jewish thinker and look at his life and his ideas. But really, in a proto version, Rav Saadiah Gaon already puts this argument forward, and is basically arguing for the truth of Judaism based upon revelation and tradition of revelation. Now, there are many arguments put forward for belief in Hashem and in the Torah itself. Many of them are philosophical. So you have an argument from design, in which you look at the world and you say there's clearly a creator. You have an argument from, they call it a cosmological argument from first cause principle, which is or is not the Rambam's view. I think not, but many think is, that the Rambam's argues there must be a first cause. You have these sort of philosophical arguments. Unsurprisingly, the Kuzari, in line with everything we've said about him, is going to argue that none of these are the best basis of belief. Why? Because they all depend on human reason, and you don't need human reason when you've encountered Hashem directly. And what it means to be a Jew is to have encountered God directly. So this is, again, all in line with the Kuzari's sort of way of thinking. Again, he's not aware of these arguments. He's part of what nowadays we call the scholastic tradition. He's very aware of these sorts of scholastic arguments, but he says, I'm going to come up with a different sort of argument, which is personal encounter and personal belief. You don't need philosophical arguments if someone knocks on your front door and says, "Hello, here I am." And this is sort of the Jewish experience. We had Anoich Hashem Lekecha. We had direct experience of Hashem. Now, the Kuzari puts forward this argument in a subtle way, which is often missed. He's often quoted as, "Look, we have a tradition of belief. And if my father told me something, whose father told him, whose father told him, whose father's told him, whose father's told him. So we have direct report of tradition. And if one knows that one's great-grandfather didn't tell one, okay, it's still you heard it from someone else's great-grandfather. In other words, there's a chain of tradition. The Kuzari says something tighter than that, and there's been a lot of discussion in recent decades revisiting exactly how strong or weak his argument is. Rabbi Dr. David Gottlieb of the Sameach Yeshiva wrote a sort of full-length monograph on the subject, in which he argued that correctly expressed, the Kuzari principle had a great deal of truth to it. Is very reliable. I'm not here, in a sense, even interested in going through and rehashing that whole debate. I just want to present what I think is my best ability to present the Kuzari's arguments in brief in the time that we have available. And the basic argument is that if you have a invention of a national event, so someone wishes to, or someone, not invention, let's not label it, someone reports a national event in the past, and it is the sort of event that, were it to have happened, could not have been forgotten. And I claim it is true. If we see that that claim is accepted, that gives it reliability. In other words, anyone can claim personal events that happen to them, or events that happened far away in distant lands or to individuals, and gullible people can accept those claims. So I can claim a revelation of an angel appearing in a cave to me on a personal level. I can claim that in northern Israel, in the Galilee, some people, a few students saw certain miraculous events. I can claim that students of a great man found that his grave was empty a few days after he was buried in it, and claimed they saw him walking amongst the living again, as other faiths do. And people will either believe that or not, as the case may be. But to have a belief accepted amongst a nation, where the national belief is something that happens to their very ancestors, and to have such a belief accepted and be convinced on a national level that the Kuzari claims is impossible. So let's just flesh out why. At some time in the past, the nation we know believed in the claims of Matan Torah, believed in the claims of revelation. And we can ask ourselves, there's one of two reasons why they believed in those claims. Either because they in turn inherited them from their ancestors, or because they were convinced about it. But how exactly do you convince a nation not about events that happened to another people far away or to individuals, but about events that happened to their own ancestors, which built into the event is the responsibility of passing this on a continual level? In other words, how do you get the first Seder night going? How do you get the first shared national experience? If I turn to someone and say, this happened to the whole of the UK population 500 years ago, and no one has ever heard about it before, there cannot be national acceptance of that idea. So this is the Kuzari's claim. Incidentally, there are far less well-spread claims, which we all take as part of national history. So no one doubts 1066 and William the Conqueror and the Normans conquering the Saxons and so on, because it's just too widely diffused to discount. Even though actually on an impact on the whole population, probably less people were aware of the Norman conquest. The average peasant perhaps had no idea about what was going on initially, and just saw the strangers perhaps turning up. Even though on a national level, there was no attempt to sort of continue this narrative and no formula or ritual that was designed to continue it. So to convince people of a national event that took place amongst the whole nation, amongst their very ancestry, and for them to say, but we've simply never heard of this before, and for people to call to that, this argues the Kuzari is an impossibility. We do know that, again, I want to be cautious about these words because it sounds like I'm dismissing the thoughts of one of the pillars of Jewish thought. We do know, though, that he's onto something, because we don't really find any other claim of national revelation in any other faith. And the Torah itself makes this point in Sefer Devarim, in which it says no other nation has ever claimed national revelation. And the reason is because it's a very hard claim to make. Individual revelation, you can claim to be in a cave, but to be on a national level, to claim national revelation is simply I'll come to a second. To claim national revelation is simply an impossibility. There are in the Indian subcontinent, there are traditions of revelation that took place to several thousand people. I would simply point out two things. Even there, the authenticity of this claim is not transmitted via their descendants. It's still an event that took place somewhere far away. And also, there's the claim that immediately after this, there was death of all those who witnessed this revelation. And therefore, again, it's reported by individuals rather than being a sort of mass family tradition. So this is the point that the Kuzari makes. And it's definitely, again, he doesn't need my agreement or disagreement, but it's definitely a point that needs a lot of careful thought and deserves very, very serious consideration. For those who are interested, there's online, as I said, Rabbi Zobin has attempted to present this more rigorously. But the point, again, to mention around this idea is not the claim by the Kuzari that any tradition is true or any family tradition is true, or, we should trust anything that our parents tell us, which they said in the name of their parents, which they said in the name of their parents. It's simply imagine a time in history. So let's talk about sort of the house of the royal house of David. So roughly 600 years after the events of Matan Torah, we know that there's a Davidic royal family. It's referenced by archaeological records, by other nations of the world, and Jews are believing in any version of it. Again, I don't want to buy into or not buy into biblical criticism and the like. I just want to, in a sense, present this as a neutral thing. Any version of the biblical tradition has mass revelation at its heart, and Jews believe in mass revelation that took place half a millennia before the time. We know that. How exactly do people begin believing in mass revelation involving relatively large numbers? Again, I don't want to beg the question whether the numbers are exact or not, but the idea that you have a whole nation saying this took place with our ancestors and the like, how would that increase by increments? How would that creep in? How can people be convinced about something that they certainly would have heard about? In other words, I can convince you of truths that you may not have heard about, but can I convince you of truths which, were my claim to be correct, you would have definitely heard about from many, many others? What does it mean? You can tell a kid in a class something about someone else's grandparents, but what would it mean when a kid comes home and says, all our grandparents of everyone in the class had this, including my own grandparents? How would something like that creep in? Now, again, those who reject this argument speak about the acknowledgement in Nach of Avodah Zarah, the loss of Sifrei Torah and the rediscovery of it, and so on and so forth. A detailed analysis of all these stories in Nach at no point indicates that acceptance of Avodah Zarah meant rejection of revelation. In fact, the Torah itself talks about the Egel Hazav, and in and of itself, idol worship, pagan worship doesn't seem to be a rejection of the concept of monotheism. You can believe in monotheism and also believe that there's value in appealing to the king's ministers and powerful bodies that are around. So how exactly to play out this argument has proved very fruitful. All I want to say is, for the purposes of our discussion about the Kuzari's life and thoughts, is that he was the most clear exponent of this argument. It became known as his argument rather than Rav Saadiah Gaon's because of how he spelt it out. And it could be that in some respects, the Rambam Maimonides also accepted this argument. There's a famous passage in the Rambam, in the Mishnah Torah, not in his Moreh Nevuchim, in which he speaks about this type of national revelation as being Einenu Ro v'lo Achel, Einenu Shomo v'lo Zar. It was our eyes that saw, no others. It was our ears that heard, and no strangers. So this argument of the Kuzari certainly has had an enormous impact on the rest of continued Jewish thinking. And in many ways, this has become, for many people, the primary route to their relationship to Torah as the sort of historical reliability of the Masorah of Torah. Most people don't engage anymore in the sort of scholastic arguments of the philosophers of that era. And in that sense, the Kuzari has become, again, a bedrock of Jewish belief. For many, though there remains still a source of debate whether this is the strongest argument, the best one, and the like. Sorry.
I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if you're trying to conflate history with faith, and he's going out of his way. Okay, so I've got that right.
Yeah.
You're trying to do something historically, more or less, when ultimately it's still down to faith. And there's no more reason to believe that the faith of a people received something on Har Sinai than there is to believe the faith of those who believe that Muhammad and Hira received a revelation, which he passed on to a whole group of people, or JC received.
Okay, so the Kuzari is exactly disagreeing with that. In other words, like it or not, he is conflating emunah with history. And he's arguing, and he has extensive sections in which he argues that we have historical reasons for believing in revelation, and it's uniquely different to other faiths' claims of revelation, in that this wasn't just an angel appearing to an individual prophet or the like. This was mass revelation, and nationally continued through the national Jewish story. So again, I'm not here in a sense to take sides in what's a big debate, but what does emunah mean? What does faith mean? And is it different to knowledge? And how does it differ to knowledge? And is there a leap of faith that we need to make in our lives? And then if there is a leap of faith, how do you justify that leap of faith? Is all part of, in many ways, modern conversation. In the Kuzari's world, both sides of the debate do not think in those terms. One side of the debate thinks that faith means knowledge of God through philosophical reasoning. And just like the tools of logic and philosophy can tell you that 1 + 1 = 2, similarly, they can tell you about belief. And the Kuzari's argument is just like the tools of history can convince you of the Doomsday Book and 1066, similarly, they can convince you of Revelation. So there's a significant body of thought in this particular time of history that there's this distinction that many modern people use to ground their faith in Yiddishkeit, that this is an emunah issue, this is a faith issue, and this sort of two domains of science and reason on the one side, and on the other hand, faith, and then how does one reconcile with them, and how does one live with them? All of this is part of a conversation which isn't on a significant level taking place in the Kuzari world. The Kuzari is simply arguing that don't come along with your in a way, I've even mispresented the argument. I just said tools of history. The Kuzari is saying this is stuff we know. We experienced this. This is what your family saw. This is even my presentation of the Kuzari argument as a sort of tools of history. In a sense, is philosophizing it more than the Kuzari wanted, because he's saying this was a national experience. This wasn't an individual experience who turns up and can claim anything. Anyone can turn up and claim anything. This is a mass experience, and therefore it's qualitatively different, and it's part of our national story. And we know it in the same way as the English population know about 1066 or the like. This isn't the stuff of Arthur. This isn't lost in legends and individual specific people. In the whole of King Arthur's life, how many people could have met Arthur and Merlin? This is the stuff of which mythology is made. This is more the stuff of Alfred. We may not know everything about Alfred the Great, but we know there was a figure there who unified various warring counties and regions, little kingdoms of England, and united them into some sort of collateral. Can we prove from this every detail of what took place? No, we can't. Can we prove from this every detail about Alfred's life? No, but this is the sort of historic event more like Alfred and less like Arthur. This isn't the stuff of mythology where we can really know very, very little. This is the stuff of history because these are national experiences. That's the point that the Kuzari is making. And if there's an emunah element into it, it can be about details. I don't think anyone can use the Kuzari argument to support the claim that every detail is reliable. The Kuzari argument is simply saying the idea that something unique, a revelation, an experience of God happens to the Jewish people on a national level, that should be taken seriously. That's the point of the Kuzari. Sorry, yeah, Neil.
Yes, so when you start off by presenting to like Jew, it talks about
Yes.
An individual in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's only when we get to the reason Torah that you didn't say as a matter of revelation, which maybe we'll say later on, sort of like almost the big points that you just laboured. He doesn't really mention Torah, which is only reason Torah as like fourth statement in his argument, whereas that sounds like it's the statement.
So the reason he starts with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is because he believes it's a personal and family story. It's a story about relationships. And that point, you're right, is a historical point. At the end of the day, it's individuals. There's no way to historically prove what happened to Avraham. He does speak a bit about this, and he says, look, if you're a Jew alive in Egypt, these were stories about your great-great-grandparents. They weren't far off. And he says this is why the Torah spells out genealogy and why the Torah tells us the history and the personal stories. I don't think he's arguing that in 2024, we can claim that a particular story to Avraham is as well established as the Battle of Hastings. On that, he's saying national experiences are like that. But once you believe the sort of national experience, then in a sense, the rest all achieve epistemological value to them or truth value to them because they're all part of the sub details of the story. So this is the first point he's saying. He's saying that as a whole, these are individuals. By the way, he mentions that when Hashem appears to the Jewish people, he says again, Hashem proudly presents himself as the parochial God. He doesn't say Hashem that created the heavens and the earth, but I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt. Not because I don't want you to know about the big picture. Again, of course I want you to know about the creation of heaven and earth. But your connection to me is your personal encounter with me. That's Yetzias Mitzrayim. So I don't. The same way with HaLevi is the one who writes perhaps the most beautiful, poetry in the last 2,000 years of Jewish history. He's a grand vision person. He's not a narrow parochial individual. He's simply arguing that the order, don't think Maimonides, he's not referencing Rambam, he didn't know Rambam, but don't think Rambam like that you start with the big picture and then it gets to how do we take these big philosophical ideas and narrow them off into mitzvahs and so on. It starts the other way around. We encountered God, we had the personal experience with him, and out of that we developed and understood the big picture ideas. Judaism is a vehicle, yes, to get to big picture, but it has to be grounded in personal experiences. So Avraham Yitzchak and Yaakov are personal experiences, but in terms of this element of the sort of basis of national history, and of course it comes down to mass experiences like that. Rav Saadiah Gaon speaks about the Mon. If you have to take the truth is I have less time to speak than I planned originally because hadn't considered the time of Rosh Chodesh. So there are other details to add to this, but I think I've successfully presented the sort of broad vision of what Rabbi HaLevi is trying to say in this particular section.
What's the Haman's argument on any specific detail in the actual story about the Torah? I.e., if you need to presume a certain number of people, a certain form of revelation in order to be able to rely on this argument?
Not really, no. It's often presented as if 2 million people saw this, because 600,000, then 2 million people saw this, it must be true. To which the response is, well, that's begging the question because the story says 2 million people saw it. The Kuzari is not doing that. He's much more sophisticated. Again, he mentions numbers and so on, but the essence of his argument is much more sophisticated than that. He's simply saying, as long as this happens to a body of people, a tribal body of people, where the claim is mass and about their ancestors, you already have a problem of how do you get a group to believe that. And he doesn't believe it can be sort of achieved by iteration. It's not the sort of thing. Anything that, again, I want to summarize Wintle. Anything that you would have expected to hear from multiple sources and you would have expected to know anyway is difficult to convince people of, or near impossible to convince people of. It's very easy to convince people of all sorts of political views, all sorts of views that they wouldn't have expected to hear of. But something that your response would be, but it's impossible, I could never have heard of, that has a unique truth value. And again, I want to emphasize, there's no doubt that Kuzari is, even if you end up not liking his argument, and there are many serious from Jewish thinkers that don't like his argument, even if you end up not liking his argument, he's onto something in the sense that we don't know any other nation that pulled off this sort of scale fraud. In other words, a national revelation is a unique claim in the literature and the annals of history. It's always been individual prophets who go off and have experiences and the like, and for obvious reasons, a small, very close circle of students where the people accepting it are relying on the reports of those students or circle, and there's a reason for that. So the Kuzari has identified a principle of history. If you may not think it's a knockout principle, but it definitely makes it harder to convince people of this sort of thing, vanishingly harder. And then again, everyone is going to do with this what they wish with, whether they consider the argument to be. I'm not trying to undersell it, but I just also don't want to oversell it. I appreciate it's just sort of a cause of much wider discussion. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. Emir Hashem, next week, I'm going to just try and explore some thoughts of the Kuzari around prophecy, around Eretz Yisrael, and around Lashon HaKodesh, and then finally around the Jewish people. The Jewish people one is the one that in the last sort of 40 years has hit the headlines again and again because of the accusation that the Kuzari thought is racist, because of the accusation that it's fed into some of the more extreme elements of national religious Zionism, and particularly Tzvi Yehuda, and the sort of quite right-wing sort of thoughts within some of that world, and whether there isn't a message of Jewish superiority in it, in that's almost racist in its extreme. So again, I'm reluctant to think in terms of his critics, but we do need to deal with it since it's so much part of the national discourse in Israel. This aspect of the Kuzari has become very, very significant in parts of the Dati Normi world, and has entered the headlines. We ourselves had in the shul a speaker about 4 or 5 years ago, Michael Goodman, who's been very involved in this debate. So I just want to share, really, again, to the best of my ability, neutrally, what the Kuzari does and doesn't say around this topic. And then I think we'll probably move on from Rabbi HaLevi, so I am open to other suggestions. Everyone, good morning, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.